Hello, and welcome to another episode of Below the Hospital, an AAMI podcast on sterile processing and the issues that sterile processing technicians face today. I am your host, Garland-Rhea Grisby Sr., sterile processing manager at Sutter Health, CPMC, and I'm also a long-standing AAMI member. In this podcast, we interview folks from around the industry about sterile processing and ask what some may consider hard questions, but I would say they're informative questions about our profession. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with someone I've known for quite a few years. We have Amanda Benedict. Amanda is Vice President of Sterilization at AAMI. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hi, Garland. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here talking with you.
Well, let's just hop right on into it. Now, let's talk about the role of guidance documents. So, what role does guidance documents, AAMI or otherwise, play in sterile processing?
That's a great question, Garland. First and foremost, they're a statement of consensus that establishes technical specifications and provides a common language in the field that's being standardized. So helps to set what should be occurring and orients everybody to common terminology. So everybody is speaking and meaning the same things when they talk about sterile processing, when we're talking about guidance documents for sterile processing. They're also intended to provide a minimum essential threshold for effectiveness in that particular practice. So they set kind of the baseline for what you should be doing to be effective in sterile processing. And we know that when somebody picks up a standard or a technical information report, they're not necessarily already meeting that standard or meeting that practice. So for some facilities, it might be aspirational. So they might have to elevate their practice a little bit.
Right.
One of the things we also talk about is that standards can help to serve as a foundation, help to enable innovation. So for those that do actually meet the standard, they can do a little bit more if they choose to. Last but not least, they're a basis for conformity assessment. So if you're using a standard, you can measure your practice against what is specified in the standard or in the technical information report and see how well your practices and what you're doing aligns with the statement of consensus about the technical specifications and what's effective for that practice. Now, that's a standard specifically. That's what it does. But let me talk a little bit also about why standards are important for sterile processing and particularly sterile processing professionals. So one of the things I would say is that any profession that wants to call itself a profession is going to have standards of practice. So what standards for sterile processing help to do is to codify the fundamental terms and processes of sterile processing. And they're going to provide a recipe for those repeated and reproducible processes that are common to sterile processing. So how those things should be done uniformly, consistently across the profession. And one of the biggest benefits for sterile processing professionals is that use of standards can really help to enhance your professional mobility and your portability and transferability of skills across employers. So if the common language here and the common practice is standards, everybody's oriented to standards, you're speaking the same language regardless of which facility you're talking with, which helps employers to have a little bit more confidence that you're able to perform the hallmark functions of the job. So their standards are really essential to not just laying out what the profession should be doing, but to help to advance the profession, help to say, yes, this is a profession and we do have standards of practice here.
Nice. I was just talking to my staff about guidance documents and how important they were. And I asked them, I said, how often have you looked into any of these guidance documents on your own? And I was shocked. Some have and some haven't. And so, in discussing the guidance documents, I said, well, we're going to make that a project and we're going to take a piece of the guidance documents and go over it, every week. We're going to go over a piece so we can have a better understanding of what's inside of these documents that we should be following. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Garland, because it really helps with day-to-day practice, and it helps folks to understand not only what's in the standard, but start to understand the why, the rationale for why things are done a certain way. And as you know, it can help with meeting accreditation requirements if you're following the standards. But beyond that, as you know, the bottom line is really to help keep patients safe, to advance patient safety in the hospitals, to ensure that when people go in for treatment, that healthcare is going to be safe for them. They're not unnecessarily exposed to contaminants.
Yes, thank you. So you touched on a little bit on what I was going to ask you next about the role that guidance documents play on a day-to-day basis in our field, in the sterile processing world.
Yeah, and I think I can say that a lot of folks who have used standards get very comfortable with, they have the standards that they're using open and they're referring to them constantly. I know, in professions that I've been in and professions that I've worked with, having that guidance document to refer back to has been very important.
Yes, definitely. I know it's helped me out. Um, it's helped me to get through some things that we should have been doing that we weren't doing, and to be able to talk to senior leadership to drive that change that we needed. So these documents are very important.
Absolutely.
So now, and speaking of it, what does the guidance document development process look like, and how are end users represented? Now, I've participated. I know I
hmm
know the task at hand, but for our listeners that don't know, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let me break it down. So everything is going to start first with an idea, what we call a new work item proposal. And that's how a document actually gets into the active work program. And that's regardless of which standards development organization, whether it's AAMI or whether you're actually talking about ISO, international standards. So there's an idea that's based around a gap that's currently unmet, an area where there's no guidance that exists or the guidance isn't comprehensive enough. That's discussed by the relevant consensus body or standards group that would be responsible for developing the document. And if they decide to move forward, it's going to be a very iterative process, which means there's a lot of work that goes into drafting. Most of that work is going to be kind of upfront. So what we call the working draft process. So you start with that idea, it goes on to the active work program. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of looking to the literature, to relevant references, to other standards that are out there, and starting to pull together the content that's going to shape those fundamental terms, those fundamental processes, and that recipe for how things should be done. So once the consensus body gets out of the working draft stage, and there can be many working drafts. I know some documents that have had 6 or 7 rounds of working drafts, which a draft is developed. It goes through comment through the consensus body. All of those comments are reviewed, discussed, edits are put back in, and that's the next draft, and then it goes out for further commenting. Now, after that, it goes through that process, and the consensus body feels like there's really good, solid agreement on the technical matter, the substantive parts of that document. It then is going to go to what we call a committee draft for vote. So this is kind of the formal test of consensus. So this is going to be a ballot. There is commenting with it. It goes out to the consensus body. If it's a standard, it's also open for public review, which means anybody in the public can get a copy of that draft standard and submit comments so they can become part of the standards development process as well. Now, if we're talking about a technical information report or a consensus report, that's only going to be balloting and commenting within the consensus body itself, so not open to public review for those types of documents. But once it gets through committee draft for vote, if there are no further technical changes coming out of that vote, out of the resolution of the comments that were submitted, then it's going to go to you produce a final draft, it goes through a final 15-day review. So let me also say, if there are technical changes coming out of the committee draft for vote, the CDV stage, there can be multiple CDVs, and we do see that sometimes where there's multiple opportunities to vote, which also means for standard, multiple opportunities for public comment as you have those evolving drafts. Eventually, when it's all settled, all the technical matter is settled, it's going to go to that final 15-day review. It's going to go to the AAMI Standards Board for their review of the processes that were used. And if they agree that all the AAMI accredited processes for standards development have been followed accurately, then if it's a technical information report or consensus report, it's published. If it's a standard, it's going to, or a candidate standard, I should say, it's going to go to the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, for designation as an American National Standard. Now, ANSI does not care whatsoever about the content of the document. They leave that to the experts to decide, what should be that standard, what is an effective process that's being developed into the standard. But they look at the process, the procedures that were followed. They make sure that AAMI followed our accredited procedures and that we met the ANSI essential requirements for development of that standard. And when ANSI approves it, and then goes to publication. So what I want people to take away from this is there's many opportunities to help shape the document, regardless of what type of document it is. There's opportunities for members of the consensus body. There's opportunities for the public with standards. So it's an iterative process. It is not necessarily a quick process. We can see it take 3 years, sometimes 5 years, depending on how many rounds it's going to undergo, how much public commenting we have, how many committee drafts for vote. So it's a really good, thorough, deliberative process to get to a standard or a technical information report or a consensus report. It doesn't happen under cover of darkness.
Now, I know that process all too well.
Yes, you do. You've been with us through a few of those. So yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is sometimes, for our listeners, sometimes a document may start off as a technical information report, and as you go through it, you realize, no, this needs to be a standard, which is what happened with ST91 initially. So.
Yeah, that's right. It can go in either direction. Sometimes you start out development of a document, which, as a reminder, it's intended to meet a need, an unmet need, serve to fill a gap in the guidance that exists currently. And the group might say, we've got enough alignment on what is that minimum essential threshold, what should be required if you're following the standard to say that, yes, I perform this practice, that a document should be, instead of a technical information report, it should be a standard. But we've also had cases where we've seen proposed standards and say, this is still a developing technology or still a developing process, and we've got information to share, but we can't yet come to total technical agreement. So we're going to do a technical information report, which oftentimes is then later in a revision process elevated to a standard.
Now, what can't these voluntary guidance documents do?
Well, first and foremost, voluntary consensus standards and other technical guidance will not supplant law or regulation. So you're always going to defer to the regulations that exist. And AAMI is very careful with, we'll point to the relevant regulations in some of the standards. So, for example, in ST79, which is Comprehensive Guide to Steam Sterilization and Sterility Assurance, we're going to refer to some of the OSHA standards, some of the Department of Transportation regulations as well. So we don't intend for these to supersede or go above the law. They're also intended to work in complement with instructions for use and facility policy. So I think that's an important bit of information about how standards interact with both regulations and manufacturers' instructions, what's coming with the device, and then what facility would expect.
So we have a standard. It's been out for a while. Now it's the revision time, right? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so revisions can really start at any time. You don't have to wait for a specific point in the life cycle of a document. And I always like to point back to ST91 for endoscope reprocessing. That first edition was published in 2015. And by 2016, enough had happened. There were changes in the technology. There were needs that we were seeing that were not met, areas of the standard that we wanted to beef up. And we decided to open a revision. So when that happens, there's a couple different ways that can work. You can have an amendment, which is just a small, very concise, narrow area of the document that's being revised or clarified. So we had that with ST79 with the 4 amendments that were published in 2020. But often you'll see a full revision And we did that for ST91. So, where the entire document is opened up and commenting, revision, editing can go across the entire document. And that also is an iterative process. So, if we open a full revision, that is going to look a lot like development of a standard. So, we don't have to go through the new work item proposal process, but we do start with working drafts, and we are going to go to a ballot. And for our standard, we are going to have public commenting.
And that timeline is about what?
Really depends. So it depends on how much input we're getting, how much has really changed. I've seen revisions occur pretty quickly, within maybe a year and a half, and I've seen them take 5 or 6 years, depending on the scope of the standard.
Well, thank you. So we frequently encourage folks to get involved in the production process. What's the value add for companies or professionals who are on the fence about contributing to AAMI's guidance documents?
Yeah, so, first and foremost, if these documents impact your day to day, they impact your job, what you do, you're going to want to add your voice, make sure your perspectives are represented. So that's really the main reason why you would want to get involved. If you know that there are gaps out there in the guidance, you're using these documents and you're seeing something that's critically needed and just doesn't exist in the current guidance, get involved so that you can ensure that users of the documents have all that comprehensive guidance that is needed. A lot of people say standards development is legacy work. You've achieved a lot of expertise in the area, and you're giving back. You're helping to inform the practice, helping to inform the profession by assisting in the development of standards. One of the biggest benefits, I think, this is across the board. This is for industry, regulators, for clinicians and hospitals and sterile processing departments, is the ability to interact with the others in the consensus body and the standards development groups. So you get to talk with the FDA, you get to talk with the manufacturers. Clinicians are sharing their experience. It's just a wonderful collaborative process where you learn so much through that type of networking. And then you develop these friends in other parts of the field and other parts of the industry. And you can reach out to them because you've built those relationships even outside of standards development. So one really big benefit for sterile processing professionals is the awareness of what's coming down the road in terms of new standards or technical information reports or revisions to existing documents. So not only are you aware of what's coming, but if you're participating in those conversations, you understand the content, you understand the rationale for why they're written the way they're written. And you can take that back to your leadership and say, here's why we need to do this a certain way. And you can point it out to the accreditors as well. That's something I've heard some of our participants talking about, that they understand why something is written into the standard that way and what it really means, what the intent is, and how to interpret it.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned being in the know about what's coming down the road. So, are there any upcoming guidance documents or revisions that you would like to draw attention to?
Oh, absolutely. So, AAMI's Sterilization Standards Program, very prolific, always very active. There's a lot going on at any given time. So, let me highlight very quickly just a couple. ST108, which was the water quality document, a lot of people are using that, but we know that there's some need to provide some additional guidance around implementation. So we've got TIR 119 under development to help do exactly that. It'll be a companion document to ST108. Under our working group 61, which is chemical sterilization, high-level disinfection, we've got two documents I want to highlight. One is guidance on UV disinfection, that's TIR 118, and another is guidance on cleaning and disinfection of patient care equipment outside of the sterile processing department. So equipment that's on the floor, that's TIR 121. I think that's going to be really important. Also want to point out, we have an amendment developing to ST91, which will help to provide a checklist for the requirements that are outlined in that standard. And what everybody's really interested in, yes, we do have a revision of ST79 underway, about to get started very soon. So we're lining up the leadership for that group. Now is a really excellent time to get involved if ST79 is of interest to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. We definitely appreciate the time. Folks, get involved. It's time to get involved. So,
Absolutely.
We appreciate the time. So, as usual, folks, I hope this episode has been useful. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. If you want to support the podcast, you can find us at Below the Hospital on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and AAMI Array. Until then, see you when I see you.